thou living light eternal, radiance of the Christ star, release to us this night a greater sense of our individual integration with the magnificent fires of the universe, momentarily glimpsed within the human heart and mind as the fires of inspiration and strength. No glamour, but the brilliance of the light is thine, and ours by reason of the conferment of the great gift of life upon us. Help us then to perceive the light rays from thy heart that penetrate and cross throughout all areas of time and space within the universe, the crossroads of all of our lives, and let us see the convergence of those rays of light and hope in the central sun of universal purpose. O living Christ, be with us now and help this service we dedicate to thee to be one of light and illumination to all mankind. Of ourselves we can do nothing, but by thy power all things may be accomplished in thy name, O Christ. Amen. This year of our Lord, Anno Domini 1973, is our moment of challenge, our moment when all of the past and its adventures have fallen into the sand at the bottom of the glass, and all of our future remains above us, descending to us as the renewal of life energy, your life and mine and the life of all mankind. Many are caught in the spider's web. Many are unable to escape. Many do not understand the purposes of life. Many do not perceive the joys that are the potential of life. These are also our brethren. They exist here in the whole wide earth, and yet we may or may not know them. We may not understand from whence they came, or even that they also are chosen. But chosen all were by life itself to bear witness to its magnificent opportunities, perceived in the doorway of our opportunity individually. The fact that you and I have a mind that is free to think, a heart that can ponder and love, a being that is motivated and can move in the busy streets of life and learn the control and the self-mastery of our body and of our mind and of form and its dimensions, so that we also may understand the formless. And how is this best conveyed today in a world where tradition has caused life to seem to appear in many trees that are rooted to the soil and cannot move? Trees that may bear some fruit and some that are barren. And when I speak of trees, I speak also of religious trees that signify that by their side is a well, either empty or full. And so we should recognize that religion today, that was intended to be a consecrated altar of worship and contact with the deity, where the vital fires of reality could become known to each man, has instead become a dead and empty activity. This is true throughout the world, and we are able to witness it, yet men defend their religions almost with their lives, primarily because they feel that they are their own, yet they do not seem to understand that they all point the way, supposedly, toward the same God. In other words, every signpost leads to the same goal, or it should. And so we have to then, of necessity, if we know about it, recognize the great brotherhood of life. The brotherhood that long ago from other planetary worlds and systems of worlds came to this one as individuals and spiritual entities ordained by God to convey the mysteries to embodied mankind who were then assigned to this planetary body in order that they might in the schoolrooms of earth learn how to master their lives and become men and women who take dominion over the earth and multiply and replenish it with every good gift, because it was so ordained. There is a purpose to life, and the brotherhood of which I speak is, of course, the great white brotherhood, often bandied around by people who utter this name as though it were not the sacred name that it is. The great white brotherhood is sacred for many reasons. First of all, because it has never been polluted and cannot be polluted. It is impossible for anyone to join it. Only those who are initiated into it can become identified with it. Individuals often speak about it as though it were a common thing. And we hear even crude, crass, and profane men say, "Oh, I'm connected with the great white brotherhood, you know." They do not understand the sacredness of the altar of which we speak. "Take off thy shoes from thy feet, for the ground whereupon thou standest is holy ground." Let us understand then, as we approach the shrine of the great white brotherhood, that we are speaking of a bond, and that which is more than a bond, that which will lead and direct us through the orderly process of initiation into such a fountain of light, embracing such dimensions as mankind in consciousness has never seen or known before. Each individual may, if he will, through the power made manifest in the great white brotherhood, its techniques, its mastery of life, its attunement with God, and its functionary as a link or mediatorship between God and man, find then the answer to all of their problems. It is not certainly intended to supplant Christ. It is Christ in action, because Christos, the universal emissary of light, the universal light, is the bridge connecting embodied mankind and the universal consciousness. When one is able to gauge the great scope of the brotherhood, one comes in consciousness to a place where they stand in awe of the initiatory experiences that will bring to man a realization of who and what he really is. Oh, but you say, why have the churches not discovered this? Why have they not discovered many things, including the Dead Sea Scrolls? An idea waiting to be born, an idea waiting to manifest. You need, when you have the flint and you have the floss, to strike the flint with the spark. To strike the flint and let the spark emanate from the flint into the floss, that a flame may be captured. Without the actual spark itself, the flame is not born. And hence, each man should understand that every day is a day intended to be a day of progress, welcoming new experiences of divinity in the unfolding drama of the ages. This drama includes those of every race, of every creed, of every clime. And all, through the initiatic process of the Great White Brotherhood, are able to find the answers to their every problem. But these answers do not come tumbling out of space into a hat that we may hold in our hand and say, I want to catch thee. No, these answers must be sought, and sought diligently by all who would have the spiritual experiences that precede spiritual mastery. Unless we are willing to obtain these experiences ourselves by humility and service, the watchwords of our brotherhood, we may find ourselves outside the pale of it. And so tonight I want to speak to you about momentum. My subject is momentum. We all are given allotted energy. With this energy we move and think and act. With this energy in waking hours, even in sleeping hours, the body temple maintains its standards. With this energy we do all things, and we are all accountable for it. Just as mankind in the commercial world place what is known as an electric meter or a gas meter in the line of source, interrupting that flow from the source to the customer, so each divinity has a measured amount of energy vouchsafed to them by the Godhead, which is put into their hands in use, can be decreased and increased through the use or misuse of the law. This energy is measured and given to us, as Christ said, the very hairs of your head are numbered. So also the energy allotment of mankind is numbered. This accounts for the fact that some people have little energy, others have much energy. There is a law governing the release of energy unto mankind. But the essential and vital fact that I want to promote tonight in your mind is that you are receiving energy which, when used by you through either the correct use or misuse of your free will, becomes accountable to yourself. In other words, you are charged for it, you are charged by it, you are the recipient of that energy, and it is in effect a talent with which you secure a momentum. Now, some people say, well, I'm not interested in securing a momentum. I don't even know what a momentum is. Well, a momentum, dear hearts, is anything that you may develop a habit pattern on. If, for example, you elect to be fat, and you want to be fat, you decide you are going to be fat, you will develop a momentum on eating, and you're going to eat until you get fat. And then when you get fat, you're not going to stop eating because you have developed a momentum on it. If you decide you are going to be thin and you're going to diet excessively, you may then do so. And as you diet, what will happen will be that you will develop a momentum of habit, a habit pattern, which will produce in you an eventual thinness. Just as people can desire to be fat, so they can desire to be thin. But the habit pattern that they develop that produces these qualities is what I'm talking about as a momentum. Now, we will not only apply this just to the physical body, we will apply it to the mind. If you decide that you are going to learn French, you will start studying French, and you will do so diligently. Every opportunity you get, you're going to be at it. If you decide to be Hercules, you're going to be muscle-bound if necessary. You go to your clubs or your backwoods or your own garage or somewhere, and you begin lifting weights, and you do all kinds of things because you want to develop the quality of your muscles. You develop a momentum on it. And by, this momentum becomes larger because you do it. And I'm going to give you a law tonight that Jesus gave you. A law that is very important concerning momentums. And I'm going to show you that momentums are all important in your life. So important that even if you decide that you're not going to do anything about anything, in other words, you're going to be a vegetable, you're going to draw nutrients out of the soil, out of your environment, you're going to pull energy into yourself, and you're going to do what you want. Let it be as whimsical as possible. You'll just do whatever comes into your mind. Okay? You will be developing a momentum on that. If you do nothing, you'll be developing a momentum on doing nothing. And by, this law that I'm speaking about will come to its own fruition in your world, and you will find your cornucopia empty. Empty because you have made it so. Empty and devoid of consciousness or motivation except to do nothing. So whether we will or no, all of us are developing momentums, and our momentums determine the kind of a person we are as well as the kind of a person we will be. We like to look back into the dingy and dim past with what degree of perception we are able to muster. Some people like to sit and contemplate or meditate or speculate upon who they might have been one day in the past. Then if they discover that they were a certain person, they grab all the history books they can find on that person and began to study their lives or life. And after all, stop and think about it. What can you do about a dead momentum? Nothing. Whatever has been in past history, the die is cast. And in that life, you have fulfilled your momentums. You have outpictured what they have dictated, but you are the one who created the monster, or the saint, as the case may be. Not heaven, but you. Individuals like to think that their glory is perhaps in their stars. They like to think that perhaps their stars have dictated to them a certain standard of life or the lack of it. And so they say, well, it's all in our stars, you know. But in reality, as Shakespeare so plainly declared, our faults really lie in ourselves, not in our stars. And so we must learn to outwit the dictates of our stars as well as our past karma. So frequently I hear individuals say, well, it's my past karma, you know, and that is my excuse for not doing anything about anything. Just sitting here, I am actually reaping my past karma, they'll say. Oh, quite so. We are all reaping our past karma. There's no question about it. But we don't have to reap and weep. Do you understand what I mean? We don't have to reap and weep because heaven has provided a way of escape, a way of harnessing constructively past energies and still making things right because we will it so. Do we dare today to say that God wills it so, that we should be going down, down, down a series of steps? Then why will we think that our past karma is itself conspiring to cast a net and snare before our pathway to trip us up, to make us to stumble? Not so. Our past karma is our past karma. But it need not be a stumbling block or hindrance if it be negative in nature. We can outwit it. We can make it right, just as a man who has gone bankrupt and thoroughly escaped all of his debtors can, if he chooses in honor at any time, pay up his debtors if he is able. Let us understand this law so that we do not become morally and spiritually bankrupt or dependent upon the whimsical side of life to perhaps ordain our freedom. But if so, by what case of jackstraws does life then elect to choose this individual above that individual? None, I am sure, because just as mathematical precision governs the ordination of the laws in the universe, so mathematical precision, God's as well as man's, determines what man is going to be and what he is going to do, namely by his own free will act. Someone may say, well, I have struggled very hard and very long. I have worked diligently to escape from my past karma, and it is enclosing round about me now like a net. We remember the story of the man who was a master of yoga, who passed through the jungle and met a king cobra in the pathway. And the cobra was ready to strike its coils at him. He looked at the cobra and he said, "Come on, Mr. Cobra," because what else can one say if you face a tarantula or a cobra or something of that kind? You can scream and say, "Oh, I'm going to die right now. There's no hope for me." Or you can welcome the return of the currents of your own past energy, your momentums, if you will, what you created, that is returning to you now for redemption and to educate you in the whole process. The primary purpose of returning karma is the education of the individual, and in examining many records of many lives, I have found that the universe does not conspire against man, but conspires with him to give him his emancipation, it seeming to be a joy to God to bring freedom and liberation to man rather than see him in the trader's toils. So let us recognize that in all of these momentums that we have created in the past, there is a way of escape. And that way is through the Christ and through the mystical understanding of universal purpose. How dare anyone say that we are created to do our own will just because we have it? Possessing our own will does not mean that we are supposed to use it wrongly. The purpose of free will is so that the gift of God can be bestowed on us because we do make the right choices. If we make the right choices, in other words, sure, there's a big circle to put your X in and a little circle to put your no in. I realize that. But then after all, the rewards are greatest when they move with the currents of life rather than against the currents of life. To tell you the truth, no one can win flowing against the currents of life. All you can get, all I can get, all any man can get is destruction, negativity, and those results that will be far less satisfying than we ought to have. It's only when we move with the cosmic stream that the dreams of God are fulfilled in us and true joy is made manifest. However, it's plain, if we stop and think about it, that this is as it should be. But there's one particularly sacred thing that I want to tell you that Jesus said that I promised to tell you before. And this has always been a great mystery to mankind. People have really wondered about this. Let us take the Master's statement now and watch. To him that hath shall more be added, and to him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. This is a strange and enigmatic statement until understood. Christ spake of momentum. To him that hath a momentum of constructivism, of working with the cosmic currents, with flowing with the stream, with allowing the divine Tao to flow through his consciousness, with opening himself to God and God alone, willingly and gladly, more of God shall be added. But to him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. Because, and stop and think about this, if you don't put the plus factor of God in your life, what are you putting in? If you eliminate the plus factor of the Creator and His purposes and His will from your life, what are you eliminating but your own great opportunity? It is an utterly bizarre thing for man to think that the Creator of the universe, the one capable of creating a physical body like we have, the one capable of creating a mind like we have, the one capable of creating a spirit like we have, with all of the solar powers or soul powers inherent within man, would then be incapable of correctly directing human life if asked. If you ask your Father, Jesus said, for bread, will He give you a stone? I believe that the will of God may be made known to man. And I believe that when man gets to know the will of God, it will be proven to be a comforting and exhorting will that will exhort man and inspire man to greater examples of reality. I believe that those that are endowed with God's will become more complementary to the universe, as the universe in turn will become more complementary to them. There will flow a push-pull action of divine currents into and out of that man or woman, and they will not be stymied by circumstances, but they will rise above circumstances, and they will learn to master circumstances, and they will learn to control themselves and their environment. If conditions are not to their liking, they will divert conditions, because such a man or woman is able to do just that. And this is true of any one of you, if you will accept it and be free. Drinking the water of life freely means just that, to accept it without money and without price, because it is the gift of God and the best things in life are free. So, your momentums, your God momentums, these are the gifts that as you accept them and grow in them, will add more of their kind to themselves. And you will become a greater and greater person spiritually. And as you grow spiritually, you are going to grow in every way. Because you cannot experience growth in one aspect of the triune nature of man that will not spill over into all the other triune manifestations. You will always perceive the central axis of love, wisdom, and power. These three comprise the central axis of man's being. In other words, what I'm saying is this central axis is not just a primary axis without tertiary division. There has to be division. There is division. And so we find the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the body, the soul, and the mind. We find the triune aspects of God manifest. Love, wisdom, and power. It's all manifest. You're not going to find just an idea, one idea, but you're going to find these three ideas manifest. Love, wisdom, and power. You have to have power in order to motivate an idea. Let an idea come into your mind that you want to carry out, supposing that that idea is very brilliant and clearly defined. When your mind perceives it, if you lack the power and the love, the other aspects of God or of divinity, the wheel of the law will not turn. You cannot turn people on just by an idea in the mind unless that idea be loved. And why is it loved? Because it is seen and perceived as a potential, as a possibility. People love it because they see that it can work. And so they set about making it work. But if they don't have the power, they can love the idea to pieces. They can think about the idea until they are blue in the face, and nothing's going to happen until they are blue in the face. In other words, we need to be blue with power, blue with determination, blue with the determination that something is going to happen because we've thought of it and we love it. So how about thinking now about the idea of momentum. If you draw this divine energy from God for 100 years, down into your mind, down into your heart, down into your being, and you don't do anything about it for that 100 years, you will be spinning your wheels. As I've said before, the only difference between a rut and a grave is one of depth. And so we have to recognize this for ourselves. Heaven is more disposed to help those that help themselves. My mother used to say, God helps those that help themselves. And I believe that this may be a bromide to some people. They've heard it before and they say, yes, it's true, but. And this is perhaps one of the problems of our times, and perhaps of all time, that people have a tendency, once they know a certain thing, to feel more complacent about it, simply by reason of entertaining an idea that they never put to work, of having a seed in their packet that they never put into the ground to germinate. They think, well, I've done this before, I've heard it before, and it's not new. Well, your pansy seeds were not new last year when you put them into the ground. Your 1971 income tax was not new until it finally became due. Everything has to be new in its season and time. We have to take some things up because they're forced upon us. But other things we are not forced to do at all. And one thing we're not forced to do is to love God. We're forced to love our wives, supposedly. We're forced to love our country, supposedly. We're forced to love the systems to which we pay allegiance, supposedly. Everything in life is practically forced upon us. Attendance at school, we have to work or we don't eat. All kinds of things are forced upon us, but the one thing that is not forced upon us in life is the greatest thing of all, and that is the gift of God. The gifts of God. Let's make it multi, because it is multi. We worry about becoming multi-millionaires, and if we did, we'd only increase our responsibility as well as our potential for good. Let's become spiritual millionaires, people that can multiply the gifts of God because we want to do it. And so the matter of momentums is the greatest law of life that I can possibly think of. And we create or uncreate momentums every single day. We make New Year's resolutions. We say to ourselves, well, this year is going to be different than last year. I didn't get enough exercise last year, so this year I'm going to get me a new machine, or I'm going to a horse ranch, I'm going to ride horseback, or I'm going to join a club and I'm going swimming, or I'm going to start jogging this year and I'm going to jog every day. And we do it for maybe a week or two, and then all at once something comes up and we're distracted. And the chain of our momentums is broken. And so it was easy to put off for the first time. It's easier still the second time. And the longer a person goes along the road of a particular specific neglect of a momentum, the weaker the momentum becomes. This is why people today in our world don't attend church as much as they should, because they have weakened their resolves. They have allowed themselves to stay away. And staying away, they develop a momentum on staying away. And the momentum gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and after a while they are a little guy, shrunk to a 1-year-old baby or a day-old baby, looking up at a giant that's lasted for a year and grown every day accordingly. The giant of their own negative momentums, their neglects. Now, the pathway to spiritual values is through the development of momentums, and I mean right momentums. Saint Germain said that his salvation, his ascension as a master, was the result of 2 million right decisions that he made. Now, if you stop and think of it from a mathematical standpoint, you will see that it would take a man quite a few lifetimes to make 2 million right decisions. Yet he made these decisions. So the whole idea is not one of procrastination, of putting off till tomorrow what you can do today. You know this, but unless you do it, you most certainly will not be developing the correct momentums that will carry you along to your ascension. Now, some people say, as we run into in my little story on the French debtors, some of the people in France many, many years ago that I recall quite well, when the doctrine of re-embodiment was then taught by the Catholic Church before it was taken out, they used to say, well, Pierre, I do owe you $10 or the equivalent in francs or so many francs, but I'm not going to pay you in this lifetime. I'll pay you in my next lifetime. Or, Pierre, I'm not going to church today because I'll go to church in my next lifetime and then I'm going to become a saint. Procrastination is an excuse which we all at one time or another perhaps have voiced. But it is an excuse which is lame and halt and blind. And who are the victims of this lameness and haltness and blindness but you and I? We are the ones who suffer as a result of it. For whether it be a worldly momentum that leads to worldly success or a spiritual momentum that leads to spiritual success, our momentums or their breaking are the point that determines whether or not we are going to measure up to what heaven expects of us. I think that you should understand this because so many people don't. They say, this poor man, he's a sinner. He's been doing wrong things. Every day he does wrong things. He's a butcher, and he weighs his thumb on every scale. And he's not good to his family. When he comes home at night, he's cruel to his wife and his children, and he goes to bed grumpy. Well, he has a momentum on this. And so you say, well, why doesn't heaven break that momentum? Because he's getting deeper and deeper in debt. You know that old story that Tennessee Ernie made quite famous, 16 ton. Another day older and deeper in debt. Well, spiritually speaking, so many people are getting deeper and deeper in debt every day they live because of their negative momentums. After a while, they begin to love them like a pet chameleon or a goldfish in a bowl. They say, that is my momentum. Don't you meddle with that. You leave that alone, that's mine. Why in heaven's name? Who in the world would want to meddle with it? No one really in their right mind wants it anyway. So why meddle with it? But those who do try to get us to change are not doing so just for their sake. They're doing so for our sake. So let's learn to recognize the difference between meddling and sincere comfort and consolation and instruction in wisdom. You know, while the best things in life are free, some things are very costly. And one thing that is more costly than anything else is to go ahead and waste your time building a negative momentum, which, by the way, doesn't take any effort to build. You see, a negative momentum is a downhill momentum. And the minute you start to stop, you heard what I said? The minute you start to stop, right away you start rolling back downhill. And so it doesn't take any energy to build negative momentums at all. They just automatically take care of themselves. They're automated. You go ahead and stop your progress. Stop somewhere on the hill and say, I'm going to rest. Just let me rest a while, heaven. Just let me stand here a few minutes. I can't keep going. You're going to find yourself back a few steps. Because this is an uphill climb. This is the ascension. This is what's worthwhile in life. Nothing equals the ascension. This is what Jesus Christ demonstrated. The Christian church demonstrates the Via Dolorosa, the way of lamentation, the sorrowful way. They talk about the Gethsemanes in life, and they talk about the suffering in life, and the tortures, and the horrors of life, and how black it is. But they don't seem to understand how light it is. Take and learn of me, the Master said, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. We can learn how to put on the yoke of the Christ And we can rejoice in that yoke. And that's not a joke, it's a yoke. And it's true. It's true as steel. And through the process of building momentums, we will be surprised at how much we will develop. Now let's take anybody in this room. I would bet you my bottom dollar that I could pass papers out here in this room and give these papers to you with a pencil and ask you to write on it what you really want. And the bulk of you would put the spiritual goals down there, because sooner or later in life you have recognized that only the spiritual goals have permanent meaning. Go ahead and get $1 million and you got trouble spending it or giving it away or doing whatever you want with it. You can ask old John Paul Getty or Howard Hughes. They have more trouble in life than people who are poor. But people may say they want money. But they know very well that they won't need it if they weren't here on this earth. They also know, and they know positively, that they're not going to get out of this world alive. So they won't need the money. But they need it while they're living. But they don't need $1 million. They can exist quite comfortably on much less. So you would write down, no doubt, permanent goals. Because if you wrote down worldly, ephemeral, or transient, passing goals, you know very well that they'd be fulfilled or not fulfilled. In other words, supposing you said, I want to marry the most beautiful woman in the world. Well, that'd be a matter of opinion. And whether she'd have you or not, you just don't know. And really, such goals are very trite in one way, because if you got all the things you might want as a human being, it wouldn't assure you one iota of happiness. You cannot be sure that if you get the goal that you think you want, that you're going to be happy after you get it. Spiritually, whether you're rich or poor, wise or foolish, or what you are, if your goals are spiritual, you know that all things shall be added unto you. You know that if you lack wisdom, you're going to get it. You know if you lack money, you're going to get that too. You know if you lack friends, you're going to get friends. Because there are spiritual people on this earth. Oh, there are not so many right now. And why is that? Because we live in the age of Kali Yuga. The Hindus describe this age as a dark age. It's an age where material concepts are coming to the forefront because of man's opinion of the scientific basis for life. But the greatest scientist of all is the Creator. The Creator is the one who was able to put in the little DNA chain the most tremendous patterns in a microscopic form that anyone could ever envision. Do you know that these little things that can only be seen by a microscope have the code of your whole life, genetically speaking, all written thereon? Well, if you're not healthy enough when you're born or start out on life, all you have to do is blame your genes, because it's all stamped there. Did you know that? The color of your hair, your eyes, your hearing, your internal organs, the state of the health of your skin. You look at somebody else and you say, gee, they got wonderful skin. Mine isn't as nice as theirs. Well, it's all the fault of your genes. But then, how did your genes get that way? Huh? How did your genes get this stamp on there? They got that way because of your past karma. So you see, what you do and what you have done has made an indelible imprint on the genetic pattern which man wears today as his own. That's my genetic pattern. But you don't hear people saying that, because they all want to change the pattern of their genes. They're discussing cloning today. They think maybe they want to be duplicated. Cloning means that you duplicate yourself in another body. I shudder to think of the responsibilities of this. We have enough to do to take care of our present body without having a whole bunch of us running around. And so the process is not a matter of cloning, but of keeping our faith in the responsibilities of the deity to help us if we ask. The greatest problem with mankind is he does not ask. People have no momentum on asking. They don't ask God for anything a lot of time until they're in trouble. They get in trouble and they say, "Dear God, there's a cliff. I've got 10 feet and I'm skidding. I'm going to go down that cliff." Say, "Help me, Lord," they holler, because they're in trouble. But if they weren't in trouble, they wouldn't even think of God. So God becomes a sort of a charm bracelet, a charmed life bracelet they wear on their wrist. It's like Aladdin's magic lamp. They rub him when they're in trouble. And the genie appears and they say, "Do this for me." But they don't understand that they can do everything for themselves that they expect God to do if they understand life right. Now, isn't that a strange statement to make? I said you can do everything for yourself that you expect God to do. This is exactly correct, because God made man self-sufficient. Each individual monad was built to be able to draw the power of the universe down and make that power go to work for him and do for him whatever he wanted done. Well, why then do we have a lack of faith, you say? Why do some people have so much faith and others have so little? Jesus said, if you have the faith as a grain of mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, "Be thou removed," and it will do so. There doesn't seem to be very much faith on earth then, does there? Because we don't see many mountains moving. But we have to understand that just as he was talking in a very symbolical way about the eye of the needle, that it's harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven, so God also had a certain thought in mind when he said, "Say to this mountain, be removed." He was talking about a mountain of adversity. There is no purpose in going to a physical mountain and saying, "Get off of there, I don't like the spot you're sitting on, occupied by you." People get so ridiculous. The mountains are the mountains of trouble and adversity and confusion. The problems we have, that's what you can talk to and it'll go. I can testify that this will work. But I can't say that I've ever seen a man running around, even Mohammed, and moving mountains physically. Have you ever seen a mountain moving physically? Did you ever see Jesus move a mountain physically? Did you ever hear anything in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John about Jesus moving any mountains? There's no recorded history anywhere where he moved a mountain. Have you ever heard of any of the great masters over in the Himalayas moving mountains? You hear of them traveling in the mountains, going here and going there, but you don't hear of them moving physical mountains. So he was not talking about a physical mountain. He was talking about mountains of adversity, mountains that are problems. And what are they but mounting momentums? Mounting momentums. Mounting momentum. You build it, and you've got to clean it up. And this is true. And of course, it's very unpopular. Everyone in the world today is looking for someone like George to do it for them. Poor George is so overburdened that I can't really understand why anybody wants to name their children George. They say, "Let George do it." They're looking for a Messiah, someone to forgive their sins. Someone, in fact, not only to forgive their sins, but to turn around and live their life for them afterward. A lot of people find the greatest of comfort in going up to Christ and saying to Christ Jesus, "You just live my life, Lord, I'll surrender it all to you." And that works very fine until the first little crossing. You know what the first crossing is? When they come up against something they want to do that they don't think he wants them to do. Then they say, "Well, this doesn't count now, Lord, don't look." And they go running off to do this thing, you see. And they do it. And then right away they want him to come back in. They say, "Now I'm going to switch the plug. I'm going to switch the plug, and now you come in, you take over my life, Lord." And after a while he gets rather confused, so he goes on a vacation, because he doesn't believe them anymore. And do you blame him? They don't even believe themselves. And that's true. People don't believe themselves, and they lose faith in everything, and this is what happens. But if they started to trust the divine within them and paid attention to it, if the voice of conscience was not seared with a hot iron, burned over until it's just a scummy mess, people would actually find that God guidance is possible. And I am here to tell you today that God guidance builds mountains. It builds momentums. That's what a spiritual mountain is. It's a momentum mountain. a mountain that moves. It has power, and it generates power to do things that ought to be done. Now we all allow, practically everybody agrees, and I was just talking tonight to a gentleman who is a descendant, Arabian descendant, in effect. We were talking about the momentums that some of the Arabian people have, where they don't get along with each other, and they're not really unified. We were talking, and the question came up, do you think these people are ever going to get together? And I said, no, not under the present circumstances, the way they're behaving. It takes a miracle to do it. And that isn't just the Arabians, it's the Irish too. It's a lot of people. People somehow or other have a way of finding fault with someone. And so many times the fault they find is really in themselves. They have eyes, and they cover those eyes with their glasses, and the glasses are colored a certain way. They're polarized. So when they look at things, they don't see them as they are, but they see them as they think they want to see them. Yes, I think there's a real problem in getting people together. And I'll tell you why. How are you going to get them together? How do you create unity? The only way that you can create unity is by having faithful stewards to carry your word. Christ had 12 apostles. Those apostles were specifically endowed by him with power from on high. He told them that. He said, I'm going to endow you with power from on high. I'm going to anoint you. And the only way that you could ever unify people today would be through a spiritual power. When Mary appeared in Cairo, Egypt, on that cathedral, do you think, for example, that that galvanized all of Arabia into a sudden desire to love each other? Those who saw her, those who were in the cathedral, they were moved by it. Those who were healed were moved. But after all, this too was an act of karma. They deserved to be there, and they were, because they had builded a momentum of devotion that brought them to the cathedral. They had made themselves receptive to the power of vision. It's people themselves and their negative or positive momentums that makes the determination as to what is going to act. It's not really their genes at all. Because the power of the genes can be changed. What are you going to do when I tell you that genetic patterns can be erased right while you're alive? What are you going to do when I tell you that you can change the power of your own genes so that they suddenly are not any more negative when they were negative to start with? You going to call me a liar? It's all right if you do. I know that I have personally, by the power of God, changed the genes that are in my own body many times. Some people look at me one day and they see me one way, and then again they see me another way. And so I demonstrate to people that they can look this way and that way, because the power to change, the potential to change is in everybody. You don't have to be insipid. You don't have to feel helpless. You don't have to be physically weak. You don't have to be spiritually weak. You don't have to be anything you don't want to be. I didn't say that you're going to be able to do it like Aladdin. Just snap your fingers and it happens. Some can. Some have a momentum on that too. And it can be done. I have seen healings that occurred in the twinkling of an eye. There was a young man sitting in my audience here one time who had cataracts on his eyes at the age of about 27. The cataracts dropped right off during a dictation. Fell right off, and he was completely healed. Another woman was in our audience in Washington, D.C., and she had a goiter that was so large. I don't know if any of you people remember that. Do you remember that, Margaret? A woman had a great big goiter hanging there. It was enough to kill her, choke her to death. And right during the dictation, it just went up in smoke. And there she was with that big bag hanging there with nothing in it. It was gone. But that's an instantaneous type of healing. It happens occasionally. But there's such a thing as a slower healing. Some of the people that saw Mary in Cairo on the cathedral, they went home and they had leukemia. And the next day it was a little less and a little less, and 2 or 3 weeks were required in time before they were actually healed. We saw the same thing in the time of Christ. There are fast and slow healings. It's like Brother William said to me one time when I was on a fast. He says, what are you on, a fast fast or a slow fast? Well, it's rather interesting all the little things that can happen in life. This keeps life interesting. It makes it worth living. But if you have an idea that the apostles and the early prophets and even the later prophets, that these people really didn't have any fun in life, disabuse yourself of that. Just imagine that one prophet going along there on his jackass. Here he's going along on the jackass, and it turns into Francis and the Talking Mule. And the jackass turns to him and says, "What are you beating me for?" Balaam, the son of Beor. It actually happened. It happened before Francis and the Talking Mule, of course, or before talking pictures. And you know, that prophet never bothered to think anything about it at all. He thought that was perfectly natural for the jackass to talk. And that, to me, was, of course, the strangest thing of all. He says, "I beat you because of this or that," and he told him why he was beating him. Start talking back. Well, what we've got to do is realize a little bit of the interesting drama of life that we can bring into our ordinary and drab existence. We don't have to have an ordinary and drab existence at all. I think people are fascinating. And just stop and think about all the people you meet that have different ideas. And you get them together and you know they're all authorities. They're all authorities. They're all authorities on something. If nothing else, then on themselves. And they'll tell you all their troubles. And if you'll sit and listen to them, and the first thing you know, you'll find you have a tin ear. And so you say to yourself, "Well, where can I go? How can I escape? I'm overwhelmed by this person's troubles. And if I keep on, I'm going to be washed away from the very face of the earth by all these troubles that are being dumped on me." And the other person is telling you about them. They feel so good because they're getting rid of all their troubles. So it's really very interesting. So coming back to the subject of momentums, don't lose sight of this lecture. This is the most important lecture you can ever hear of because on it hinges your own future development in every way. There's nothing more important. I can guarantee you that that guy over there that in Paris, Saint Germain, was sitting with a whole group of men and they wanted to see if he could demonstrate his power to them. So at that particular time he decided he would demonstrate his power. Oh yes. So he waved his hand, and the next thing you know, the table and all the chairs were hanging out over the street in Paris, several stories up in the air. They were all sitting there out in thin air. And there they were. And they looked at him, and they blinked, and they looked down, and what could they do? They were there, and they were seated. So pretty soon he waved his hand, and they came back in the room, and the chairs were all in there again. So he did all this. But do you know that Saint Germain, who could take gemstones, he could take a stone like this, and if he saw a flaw in it, he'd hold it up before his eye like this, and he'd look at it. He would see no flaw in it. And pretty soon the flaw would disappear. All these things Saint Germain did. Jesus did all kinds of miracles. Saint Germain did miracles. Mother Mary can do miracles. I know this from a personal standpoint. I've seen her do it. In fact, you might be surprised, Paolo Veronese, or Paul the Venetian master over here, he can do miracles too. And what's more, you can do miracles, but you don't even know it. I think sometimes it's very good that people that are living objectively in physical bodies don't know too much about what they can do, because if they did, they might create chaos for each other, because most of the time you find people in this world that are not stabilized in their emotions. It's almost like that program Bewitched on television. I mean, if the girl doesn't like what you do, she goes like this, and the next thing you know, the guy's got horns growing on his head, or anything else. And this is true. I mean, you see this in Bewitched. You'll see all kinds of things happening. Why? Because it's supposed to be witchcraft. We don't believe in witchcraft. We're not interested in that. But people are practicing witchcraft on each other in effect, because many times when someone brags about something, and I learned this in the Middle East too, they told me about it over there. People brag about their children. Somebody puts what they call the evil eye on them, on the children. The children get sick and the children die. I heard that in Cairo. They definitely believe in what they call the evil eye. Well, whether you know it or not, the evil eye is simply people using the power of vision for evil. So what actually happens is somebody comes along and somebody says, "Gee, I got a wonderful business. I got a beautiful home. I got a beautiful wife. My kids are pretty. Everything's going fine for me. I'll become a millionaire in another year." Somebody says, "Aha, It's like the time we sent out one of our folders on the Summit Lighthouse, a world pillar. We sent it all over the country, and one guy come back and he says, "You say you're a world pillar." He says, "I say you're not a world pillar." And he says, "You never will be again." He says, "I'm the high mucky muck from some big planet up here." He wrote us this letter, and he says, "I've met with people in spaceships up in New York," he says, "and so," he says, "you were a world pillar, and you'll never be a world pillar again." But the point is, there's always somebody that's jealous of you. So don't be so foolish as to tell people all your wonderful things, what you can do or what you have done, or how happy you are. There are people that are jealous of your happiness. Be smart and silent, for silence is golden. Silence is golden because it will avoid the mass mind from closing in on you. There's a lot of you people that are not aware of the evil power that is in human evil eyes. Not evil eyes from a standpoint of witchcraft or some spooky thing, but human beings that may be, and I'm not running down you blessed older ladies, but maybe a white-haired old lady, or maybe a young gal that looks like a saint. You can't tell. Anybody can have an evil eye in the sense that they have an evil power of vision. They're jealous, in other words. And jealousy is what creates losses. People see someone, and someone sees them, and then this person decides that they don't like it because this person is successful. So they think inside, "I wish something would happen to them." A lot of times it's a subconscious thought. Did you know that? It doesn't have to be a conscious thought. It can just be a subconscious feeling of, "Well, I'm not that way. Why should they be that way?" People forget that every thought that they think is their responsibility. They forget that if someone dies because they think a bad thought, that they're accountable for that person's death. People do not understand responsibility. They think they can get away with something in this universe. We get away with nothing. We're just kidding ourselves if we think we do. So you go out and build constructive momentums instead of destructive momentums. And keep silent before people. Some people say, "Well, I'm always out trying to talk about the masters because I think that by talking about the masters, I'm going to build the work up, the movement." Don't worry. Just lift up the Christ in your life. If you lift up the Christ in your life, you're going to draw all men to the light. Why, you can draw just as much with silence as you can with noise. Speaking doesn't mean anything. Speaking sometimes can detract. You've heard the story about the man who was all ready to marry a gal until she opened her mouth. And after she opened her mouth, he didn't want anything more to do with her because, we often show our ignorance by opening our mouth. So what we want to do is develop silence and harmony and gratitude. You be grateful to God and you watch how you'll grow. One of the most neglected things in this world is failure to be grateful for what heaven gives you. You just sit and be grateful sometime. Try sitting for 5 or 10 minutes and just thanking God for all the blessings He's poured out on your life. Try it sometime. Watch the change in your thoughts and the vibratory quality of your mind. Well, for heaven's sakes, the first thing you discover is you begin to realize that by thinking the wrong things most of the day, you're building wrong momentum. Build a wrong momentum and reap the rewards, which are certainly negative. Build a right momentum and reap the positive rewards. To him that hath shall more be added, and to him that hath not shall be taken away that which he hath. You say, what an unfair thing. My mother used to hear that. She used to say, that's such a strange statement. And so many other people in the Christian church today have heard that statement and wondered about it. Well, it's very simple when you view it as a momentum. To him that hath, in other words, if you start a momentum, you will say you get a momentum of maybe 60 days doing anything. In 60 days you have then a momentum. Then more will be added. But supposing you don't ever start it, well, then you're going to get taken away the blessings you already have, and that's exactly what it means. So I think that some of us better start building momentums correctly, because they are the key that will make us master. We can be like Saint Germain. We can be like Mother Mary if you're a lady. You can be anybody that you want to be and be like them, because you will see them as they are. Do you know that a lot of people look at God the wrong way? It's really frightening sometimes to think that human beings can look at God the way they look at Him. God is not a dictator. He doesn't sit up there on His throne and polish His halo. He's not a God sitting in an antiseptic corner of the universe saying, I am holy, I am sprayed with chlorophyll. You know, and all you people down here below, you better get on the ball or else. He's not like Nero, fiddling while Rome burns. God is God of all mercy and all justice. And He's got a representative right in your city. You. He's got a representative inside of you. He's got an emissary, a functionary, a being. You can communicate with Him. You can talk to Him. The channels of communication are open. Try it. He says, prove me now herewith whether or not I shall open up the windows of heaven upon you and pour you out a blessing that you cannot contain. He has said that. That is a promise. And so the failures to realize that promise are because we lack the faith to accept it. And the lack of the faith is the lack of the momentum, because a momentum is a momentum of faith. Sometimes people look at our decree books and they say, those people, they sit there and they decree and they decree and they decree, a mere repetition of vain words, because it accomplishes nothing. I have seen people who have developed a decree momentum use it both for negativity as well as positivity. You may be surprised when I say that. In Wanamaker's department store in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a woman who spent about 20 to 30 years of constant decreeing became irritated with a sales clerk because she asked her to sign the same slip 3 or 4 times, and the woman finally got irritated because the woman was almost going blind from diabetes. When she wrote her name down, she signed it in the wrong place. But finally, the diabetes and the insistency of the sales clerk and the whole situation threw and triggered in her an absolute tirade of anger, or what you would call a riptide of anger. And she took her fist and she raised it up with all of 30 years of decreeing, and she smashed it down on the counter and she yelled out in Wanamaker's department store, and the people that were in there thought a bomb had gone off. Because of the decree momentum that that woman had when it was used the wrong way. Do you see what I mean? Into anger. So you have to watch the responsibility you have when you decree and when you pray a lot. Because when you decree and pray a lot, you then have a more than ordinary contact with heaven, and if you turn around and say something to somebody, your words may come true so quick you'll be really surprised. So you be careful with the power you develop in decrees. You be careful with the powers of your spiritual momentums, because spiritual momentums can be used wrongly. And when they are, it becomes tantamount to the use of black magic. I want you to understand that, because Jesus Christ said, let not the sun go down upon your wrath, because He was familiar with what the ancient Egyptians called the ka. The ka being that part of you which can go out of the physical body at night. And if you go to sleep at night and you have retained in your consciousness a measure of anger against someone, and you go out, I am telling you now that that anger can gather such a momentum of negative energy that it can be responsible for the death of another individual against whom you have directed that anger. And I'm telling you that to warn you not to do it, not to get you to do it. Because if you do it, you really will have to clean it up. Because you can cause people sickness, heart failure, all kinds of problems just because you hate them. You hate them in consciousness, in waking consciousness. When you're asleep, the blindness of man in sleep is such that the ka goes out and it does whatever the conscious mind willed it to do. So that's why Jesus said, let not the sun go down upon your wrath. And of course, it's a metaphorical statement, because not only does the sun go down now and the person go into the realm of sleep and the wrath go out, but also the sun or the light goes down and is eclipsed by the negativity itself in their life. And so we must learn to interpret the Scriptures and understand the Scriptures as vital and living. We're dealing with tremendous cosmic laws and principles. And when we use these principles correctly, we will find out that no one is responsible for our rise or fall except ourselves. Heaven has already willed it so that we shall be free. But it's up to us to make it a determinate fact by building a spiritual momentum. Why, a momentum is the most wonderful thing in the world when correctly used. Your momentum is what will bring you. You know what I mean? That's what brung you, and it'll bring you a long way, too. But without it, I have very little hope for anyone, because I can draw in thousands of people. If we had the room to put them, it could be done. We can bring thousands of people into a room and talk to them about these things. But if they don't have the proper momentum, those people are going to go out and they're going to lose their soul. In many cases, they'll be a castaway. The momentum is the greatest thing you can build, because whatever you want, I don't care what it is, you can get it with a momentum. Now suppose it's like the old story I've told before, that some of you have never heard it probably, where a great Roman Catholic bishop went out to a little island where missionaries were there, as well as young monks and so forth. And they were so happy to see him. At last they were visited by a real live bishop. And so he came out to the island and he taught them several prayers. And finally he took his leave, and they were very sad. And so he got on the ship, and the ship sailed away till it was almost over the horizon, and then he looked back and he saw three little figures walking on the water coming toward him. And he couldn't think what in the world it was. But the closer they got, the more he saw that it was three of the monks that he'd taught that were walking right on the water and coming up to him. And they got to the very back of the ship, and they yelled up, and they said, "Oh, great bishop, we've forgotten the prayers that you taught us." And he come back, and he put his hands up, and he says, "Bless you, my children," he said. "Go back to your island. You don't need the prayers." They were walking on the water. So the idea is that by developing the correct momentum, we won't need anything else. The correct momentum can work through your present prayers, by the way. In other words, your methodology does not have to be orthodox according to our tradition. It can be according to your own church's traditions. It can be according to your own traditions. It can be according to no traditions. It doesn't matter. If it works, if it is a momentum that is constructive and will draw forth the hoped-for response from heaven, why worry? Archangel Michael tells a story, and I'd like to have that song played at this time, be ready to play it, that da-da-da-da, you know. You know the song? They use that at Annapolis, Maryland for the Navy. Strong to Save. 139? Yeah, I'm going to have you play that in a moment. I'm going to tell you the story after she plays it. I just wanted to play it a couple times through. I'm going to ask Archangel Michael to charge it with his radiation, because it's already there. But I mean, I'm still going to ask it so that you'll get a special double charge of radiation from the Master. And I want you to hear that, and I'm going to tell you the story about that. Go ahead. Let her rip. You know where I got that, don't you? Some of you do. It was over in Soldiers Field in Chicago. They had the place just jammed for a great big ecumenical conference, and they'd asked the Methodist bishop to stand up there in this tower, which was way over the field, and the people looked like ants from that tower. And he was up in there, and he had a red and a green light. And they told him, they says, as soon as the green light comes on, you start to pray. So the red light was on, and of course the green light didn't come on, and he sat there, and they pushed the button for the green light, but it never acted. So he sat there and sat there and sat there till he was almost beside himself, you know, looking at the people. They were all looking up at him, and no prayer. So finally he saw one little figure like an ant going across the field, and this little figure kept getting closer, and the guy got to the bottom of the tower, and he couldn't communicate with the telephone. All the things had failed, and the red light was on. He says, "Bishop!" He says, "Let her rip." You got that charge. It's on one point there. Did you know that? That's why I stopped you, because I saw it come down. But you're dealing now with a hymn that Archangel Michael, long before he was an archangel. You know what an archangel is? Well, it was just last week that the Archangel Michael told me what he was. He told me, he says, we are architects. That's what the word arch means. See? They're architects that God uses in the drafting of plans for various projects in the universe. People think that they're just nothing, you know. They're just a functionary, like a plenipotentiary. They sit on a throne, and they flap their wings and their jaws, you know. They think that's all that takes place. But what really takes place is they're architects, and an architect has a full-time job. An architect is a tremendous individual. Do you know that? Do you realize what an architect is on a big project? An architect's a very important key person. They're responsible for putting everything together. So an architect, or an archei, or an archangel, is a very important being. See? Now, Archangel Michael was not always an archangel. At one time, he was only an elemental. And after he became an elemental, he did one of those magnificent things described by St. Germain in his book, Most Holy Trinosophia, where he explains how the elementals can bridge the gap and come through the human kingdom into the angelic kingdom. So Archangel Michael made it. He not only got to be a human being like we are, but he also hopped up into the angelic realm. And he got promoted there until he finally became an archangel. Now, a lot of people think that these great beings just happened, that God, out of the whimsy of his mind, suddenly sat there and said, I'll make me an archangel. So he says, all right, boom. One of these flowers or something turns into an archangel. Well, it doesn't work that way. Those people, the archangels I'm speaking about, they are just like people. They start out and then they keep on, and the angelic realm is promoted too. And that's why the universe is so big. That's why you have the borders of infinity. It just keeps on going. Because everybody is intended to find their place in the sun. People are supposed to go up higher and higher and higher and higher spiritually. They're not supposed to stop. Wouldn't life be terribly uninteresting if we had no challenges? My present challenge is here in Colorado Springs. But I don't expect to be forever here in Colorado Springs. I don't expect to be forever here in this world. Do you? Be kind of silly. It'd really be kind of silly because there's so many more wonderful places in the universe. Beautiful places. And there's greater opportunities. So Archangel Michael was on another world before he ever was an archangel, and he was winning his victory. And during the time when he was just being absolutely sawn asunder by events, he just couldn't hardly live. He was face to face with the greatest, most crucial trial of his entire career, and winning his victory, the melody came to him. He began to feel that tremendous power in the universe. That's a current of power in that song. Do you realize it? That's got power in it that overcomes, you see. It's faith is what it is. That song is a song of faith. And that great song of faith is what anchors the radiation of Archangel Michael into a person. So you sing that song, you get that feeling, and you really grow. And it's faith that will make you build a momentum. I wanted you to have this tonight. I wanted you to understand it, because it'll make you a different person. It's faith that overcometh all things. But faith is developed by momentum. Layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. The giant redwood trees grow and grow and grow. With the cycles of the years and the passage of time, we can all master events and circumstances to become sublime. So let's do it. I've enjoyed being with you this evening. God bless you.